Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining the next episode of the Immergence Show where we talk about the latest and greatest in emerging tech and immersive experiences. I'm Nico Farah, your host, and I have a special guest today, Nick Grant, that we're going to talk about 3D content strategy and some really actionable tactics for all of you to incorporate as you're thinking about incorporating emerging tech into your marketing strategy. And we are going to talk about some very recent real world case studies, including Sephora Metaverse and Atlanta Braves Digital Twin Stadium. So, very cool topic. I know that these emerging tech, AI, spatial computing, they all could be intimidating for some brands and marketers because they're all new technologies. So that's why we have experts like Nick that are going to help us to strategize and plan to win. So I would love you to introduce yourself, Nick. Thank you so much for being with us. Tell us more about your background, and then we dive into the topic.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, Nico. It's a pleasure to be here. So a little bit about myself for last about 6 years now. I've been working in kind of the immersive experience space. Prior to that, I've been working in 3D in more of a metal kind of design fashion, and that kind of translated into doing stuff with Unreal Engine, doing immersive experiences in there, and then COVID just accelerated things, and obviously the metaverse bubble came with Meta renaming their brand, and we just kept building. We kept building what people wanted, what people were asking for. And it got to a really exciting spot, and then we kind of things started to settle down. And the need, has settled. The hype's not quite there. And now I'm focused on something else, which is more of that, like, what is 3D? How do we talk about 3D? What is 3D content, and building that into, our already existing marketing strategies, right?
Love that. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Before we get started into the topic, for our amazing audience, if you would like to ask us questions, use the comment section. We can see it, and we're happy to discuss it as the topic gets to that topic. So the first, before we get into the case studies and the great use cases, let's dive into what 3D content strategy really is, and what it means for brands that are looking to be on top of the trends and do something exciting for their audience.
Yeah. So really, I mean, we have to get down to kind of the basics, right? Like what 3D really means, and really kind of what our audience, our demographic is looking for. And we live in this kind of live in this world where we have multiple generations currently, right? And each one of these generations is knows what 3D is. They have different expectations for the 3D. They have different needs for 3D, like what 3D can give to them. And so it's important to understand all of that, right? It's important to understand how they're using it, what they're using it for, and that's kind of where it all begins for us, right? It's diving in there and understanding and trying to figure out how your demographic is interacting with 3D, and how we can then gamify your message in a way that attracts that particular audience set, right?
Awesome. Sounds good. So do you want to tell us maybe for a hypothetical brand, what does that look like? So if they have been doing everything on e-commerce and everything was 2D, kind of what type of benefits they should be looking for? What is the process like? What are all the processes for them to like go ahead and convince their team to want to take over a project like this, and how should they go about it?
Yeah, so there's again, this kind of goes back to the demographic point, right? So if you're an e-commerce company and you're targeting baby boomers, then that strategy is going to be completely different than if you're in e-commerce and you're targeting Gen Alpha, right?
Right.
Now there's a strategy for both of those, right? The older demographic is truly looking for utility in an experience like that, right? And that older demographic, I mean, and it can come with all of them, but it's really kind of geared towards the older demographic is that ability to see something in place before you buy it. So an AR filter that allows you to make sure that desk is going to fit where you think that desk is going to fit, right? It's utility like that they're looking for. Configurator stuff. There's a lot of configurator work that gets done in the e-com space that's in 3D, and again, those are very utility type things, right? And those are progressing to the point where again you can modify and customize your own personal thing and then see it in your space, right? And so as those continue to grow, and as the platforms that we use to deliver that content continue to grow, that will just be a booming market in and of itself, right? And so potentially an extension of kind of 3D experiences, right?
So examples of that is like IKEA, correct? Like, showcasing the items in your home, or Amazon. So AR is very popular among those use cases, especially around furniture, home goods. It makes total sense. And even beauty, right? We see with Sephora to some extent. Yes.
Yeah. AR filters inside of beauty brands is they're amazing, right? And they're getting better. And so the more accurate you get, and this is where kind of when we start talking about AI, this is where AI starts to make an impact on society, right? And these types of things. It's not, hey, ChatGPT, write me, an essay. It's hey, how do we do these things, right? Like, how do we deliver better experience back to the end user based on that user's preferences, right? Like, how do we truly understand who that person is so that the content that we're giving back to them is exactly what they want, right? And they trust that content to be accurate. And again, that's a big proponent that we'll see. But yeah, absolutely, virtual try-on is a huge market.
Yes. Great. And what about the Gen Alpha, Gen Z that are very demanding, for these new technologies? How do you go about strategizing for them?
There's a couple of different ways. I mean, again, virtual try-on, like we just talked about, fits that demographic really well. If you're in the older Gen Z and the millennial range, creating kind of social media tie-ins goes a long way there as well. We don't see as much social media usage in the Gen Alphas that we do in
gaming
and millennials. Yeah, right. They're kind of weaning. They're not into it. I shouldn't say they're not as general, but in principle,
not as much. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, building those types of features in are great for that demographic. And then the younger you get, you've seen the explosion of brand worlds in Roblox, right? And, there's a reason for that. And that is that's where Gen Alpha is. So if you're trying to target Gen Alpha, Roblox is an amazing place to do it. What brands struggle with in that regard is the fact that they don't have the ability to extract their own data, right? Like they lose the person in between this section, and they're trying to figure out how do we get that section back, right? And that section is the internet, right? Yes. We need to replace what's running currently on platforms with the internet, and that'll really kind of help open things up. But yeah, if you're targeting today, if you're targeting the younger demographics, the younger ages, the Gen Alphas, building playable learning experiences, and they don't have to be learning in the sense of school, but learning of like product, right? Like, oh, that's a really cool shirt. Doing integrations, with Roblox is great with fashion stuff. I mean, you can see there's been a handful of items that have come out of Roblox that were designed in Roblox, came out of Roblox to be produced in real life and yes. sold out, right? So there's that. You can create that inside that environment today.
Amazing. And so what about, kind of thinking through creating your own custom environments versus going to these platforms? versus just having your e-commerce store and adding the 3D assets. How do you go about strategizing for different brands when they are kind of thinking through these options?
Yeah, so I mean, again, sticking on the e-commerce side, I don't. I think we'll get to a point where we do have kind of 3D shopping, right? I don't think the market is quite there yet, right? So in that regard, if we look at the mass adopters for the metaverse, right, is kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about removing these platforms and making this the internet, right? So if we're talking about doing that, the mass adoption doesn't come until really millennials are kind of the top of the food chain, right? Like the older millennials will be kind of the top of the generation, and we have more Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and continuing generations, the younger generations. We'll see more adoption of it there. And so building for today, building your own space for today isn't economical at this point, right? And it just doesn't make a ton of sense because it's hard, it's expensive to build video games. Like the bottom line is if you look at the money that Fortnite spends to be Fortnite and Roblox spends to be Roblox, they're very, very expensive, right? And so that needs to come down a little bit, and that's what we're seeing inside of Roblox and Fortnite is that UGC. Like we can reduce the costs and make these applicable, right? I mean, I think the numbers I just read the other day about Fortnite for the first year paid out $320 million, and there was like 5,000 or 8,000 new worlds that were created in the first year. So it's nuts, right? So that's the scale you need to get to where we need to be. We just need those things to be open, right? And ultimately, I think both of the platforms would be willing to do that, right? It's not necessarily that they're anti that. It's just the way that they're set up today.
Awesome. And so, under what situations, like, do you recommend brands to go ahead and create their own world? Is it like when they have sub brands under them that then justifies the price? I mean, I think being Fortnite or Roblox, that's kind of unnecessary for a brand. They don't need to have that much details. But in the case of, for example, Sephora, why did they create their own world and not being part of a bigger world?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately there's probably a vision over there to have a massive LVMH world, right, that all of these can tie into. I'm not a strategist for them. I have no idea, right? Just
as an example, yeah,
that's how that would work, right? You'd have a universe, if you will. No, so to get to your question, I mean, when do you recommend it? Building your own space is it has a couple of amazing use cases. So first of all, you're building a venue, right? And you're building just a virtual venue. So just like right now, you and I are on a platform and we're talking,
sure.
We're leasing this space, right? And so here, brands can build their own venue, right? They can build their own event spaces. So when they want to do virtual meet and greets, and again, as this technology progresses and we see more and more of this, and the younger generations getting into the workforce, they're going to demand these type of things, right? So I always go back to, I'm what they call, Gen Y, right? So kind of right in the middle between, at the end of the millennials or at the end of the Gen X and beginning of the millennials, right? Like that first few generations there, because at this point in our lives, we basically spent half of our life without technology and the other with technology, right? And so we have this relative balance, and that's also an interesting spot from a perspective of we were around when AOL Instant Messenger was invented, right? We were around when chat rooms were invented. And you think about that, and then you think about the tools that we're using today in the workforce, right? If you think about Slack, Teams, right, all of those are just better versions of AOL Instant Messenger, right? The better version of a chat room, right? It's more direct, it's localized to me. So these tools were driven by the technologies that we grew up with, right? And the younger millennials grew up with now are driven in the workforce because we're in the workforce, right? Like that's the massive workforce is the millennial groups right now, and the older Gen Zs. And so if we look at that model and we say, okay, right, what are the technologies that the younger generations are using today that will translate into business practical use cases, right? And it's gaming. I mean, 100% it's gaming, which is 3D. And so we need to start building for that now. And you got to look at it as infrastructure, right? So you're just building a new venue. It's a digital venue that you can turn on when you want. So doing virtual events, whether they're external facing, internal facing, or it's just internal use cases for training and onboarding and things like that, right?
Yeah, totally. I love that analogy that you mentioned. That tells the story very well. And so in terms of these 3D assets that brands are creating, what are the benefits for them? Like, is this something that they can use outside of this activation or event that they're planning? How do you go about explaining to them to kind of justify the cost and the time that they're putting in to create these?
So again, multiple different spectrums here that we could get into. Sticking to kind of the use cases that we've touched on so far with like venues and things like that. I guess if we kind of look at venues and go into sports, I should say, we start talking about sports, then we look at venues and somebody once mentioned to me, I think it was John Flynn at Microsoft mentioned to me, the stadium is the team's biggest studio, right? Mm-hmm. It's where all of their content is produced. I mean, maybe not all of it, but like every single game that's played in there, that's a studio, that's content being produced, right? And so if they can build that in a digital twin version, right, in a tool like Unreal Engine or Unity, where they can then use that for virtual production purposes, right? That's just one additional use case on top of holding events and holding venue, having people come in, using it for training, right? And it kind of hits with that one tool, you can kind of hit multiple aspects, right? So if we look at what boomers are looking for with 3D and what they want from 3D in a sports context is they want to know where the closest beer is, where the closest hot dog is, and where the closest bathroom is, right? And how do I get to my seat? Like that's what they're looking for. Like just give me the basics. And so using a digital twin and IoT data, you can do that, right? Like if it's a digital twin, you can say, hey, turn left, turn right, go up the stairs. You know what I mean? That's your bathroom. You can do all of that in a very simple manner, just on a handheld phone, which everybody is comfortable with nowadays, right? So additionally, as we get into, and things are going to evolve in the broadcasting world, right? Because right now, nothing is broadcast in 3D. So who owns the 3D broadcast rights for an MLB game, or who owns, right? Just like they buy them for cable and TV, who owns those rights in a 3D environment? So as that changes and that progresses, we're going to see more and more, features that can be baked into that. So watching a game live for a millennial, I'm able to see live stats on the field. I'm able to see player information. I can click on players, right, and drive that type of information. And again, we can gamify it like we've been doing already for the Gen Alphas and the Gen Zs, and their needs will change as they progress through this cycle too, right?
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it could be like basic use cases, not something that's imaginary. So that's great to know. You touched on gamification, and we talked about gaming. We know that these concepts are a little bit different. From the gaming perspective, you have like a big story, and then like there are sub stories, and then there are so many activities that kind of tie back to that bigger purpose and bigger mission that the players have. Now, when we're talking gamification, we're just mostly focused on reward systems and incentivization of the user. How do you go about strategizing for different brands and different audiences when they are thinking through whether they need a real game or a mini game or none of those and just the gamification?
Well, again, it kind of goes all into it, right? So you've got different aspects of how to get into gaming, right? You can buy product placement into games and have your product placed into games. There's that. But if we're talking about gamification and we're talking about brands building games, right? And one of my favorite examples is what Balenciaga recently did with their ski line or their ski wear. And so this is the first time they'd ever produced ski wear. They wanted to do something big. So they commissioned a mini game to be built of skiers, and it was very simple, kind of endless runner style mini game where you went down, right? And you got to select from the black or white, ski suit. You got to kind of, very simple direction, right? But at the end of it, there was a global leaderboard, so you could sit there and grind it out. And what I love about that because it's a core concept of gaming, right? So I see Philip's question there, like one of the core concepts of gaming is that anybody can be the best if they're willing to like put the time in, right? And put the energy. And so, when we think about gaming, we have to think about grinding, right? It's part of the process. And so it allows for anybody to get into that game, grind it right down, and however much you're willing and determined to make it happen, you can make it happen. And then maybe you're the global leader, and you would never had a chance to own a Balenciaga ski suit, but now you do, right? Because you wanted it bad enough to get it. And that's what I love about initiatives like that, right? And so for me, that's the heart of gaming. So it's not so much about the art direction, the storytelling. I mean, those are all going to change regardless, right? It's more about how do we democratize gaming in a manner for everybody, right? Is kind of for me, it's the most important aspect of gaming.
So basically, these mini games are what you recommend to most brands, or do you think that there are certain brands and certain audiences that just kind of incentivization and reward system will be sufficient for their activities?
Yeah, I think you have to be able to have both, right? And so you have to be able to tie them all together. And so we see rewards across multiple platforms, right? And we're now starting to see kind of the interoperability of those rewards, right? Like my credit card points I can now use on Amazon, right? Like it's that type of incentivization that we need to get to here, right? Where we're really interoperable with that, where the rewards that I earn here are across everywhere, and that requires an ecosystem, right? Not so much a platform, right? I can't spend my V-Bucks in Roblox, and I can't spend my Robux in Fortnite, right? And so how do we get to that basically layer where we can have that interoperability between virtual currency, because virtual currency, just like loyalties and rewards, they're tied together, right? Like I can get a free hot cup of coffee because I have enough points at Dunkin' Donuts, or I can get a free pizza at Domino's, right? Like because that's a financial value that it's attached to that loyalty program, right? So we need that same thing here, which means we need currency, and it needs to be an interoperable currency so that we can truly experience that. But yes, today tying them even into your current loyalties program is a huge thing to do, because it connects the business groups.
Yeah, especially because the current loyalty systems are so outdated. We really need some more innovative solutions for that. So thank you for that. And potentially, like the Web3 elements can really help for that interoperability.
And just to pick on Web3 a little bit, I'm a big believer in Web3. I like the technology. I think it makes total sense. The problem with Web3 is we've just been selling features as opposed to technology, right? And you don't sell, like, technology changes things. It doesn't get sold, right? Like, nobody sold the internet. Nobody, you know what I mean? So, like, nobody's going to sell Web3. There was no hype bubble around Web2, right? So we kind of got this hype bubble. But again, I believe in the technology. I believe in the vast majority. I believe in a lot of the use cases that are being developed today. And I do believe that loyalties is one of those, right? I think loyalties programs inside of here allow for interoperability, right? They allow for that ecosystem to be developed, and so they're a perfect Web3 is a perfect technology to use to build out loyalties programs.
That makes total sense. Awesome. So let's bring up the examples that you have worked on before, and maybe share more about the process, kind of like what was the goal, what's the challenges, like whatever you can share about some of these case studies that you guys have done, I think would be amazing.
Yeah, so we've kind of hit on a couple of them already, and dive into them a little bit more here. So we'll start with the freshest one. Sephora Universe launched back in January, and it was a fully immersive 3D world, avatar-based, multiplayer, kind of MMO, metaverse-style web experience.
Nice.
Multiple brand collaborations, multiple product integrations, and really kind of an amazing use case for what we were just referring, what we were just talking about as far as e-com, right, and selling. They had really kind of one mission in mind, and that was to deliver product knowledge to the end user to make them feel more confident, in a purchase decision, right? And I can show off a little bit of it here in a video, but ultimately, in that regard, it was a complete success, right? They were able to deliver content, product knowledge, product content directly to the consumer in an engaging way, that allowed the user to feel rewarded, right? Not only like knowledgeable and have better knowledge about a product, but rewarded for their time, their energy of being there. And so, again, amazing use case, and I'll let you guys watch the video.
Yeah, and we can then talk more about it. Yeah, Sephora has always been at the forefront of adopting technology. I've worked in the beauty space, in beauty tech space, and Sephora was one of the early adopters of virtual try-on and everything else. So really exciting to see this from them.
Say LVMH as a whole is
Yes.
just done an amazing job with innovation.
Totally. Awesome. This is really cool.
Yeah, this is the world. This is the different brand worlds here. We'll flash through. Right. This was created in collaboration with the brands. So obviously, Sephora is a house of brands, and so working closely with the brands to develop these things out was extremely important. Right. And so you're almost doing sales inside of the sales, right? To onboard brands and get them excited and help them visualize and create their storylines. And Sephora did a really great job of getting back to Phil's question about gamifying that, right? And rewarding exploration. I think we could have gone further in how we tied all that together. Again, that next layer of interoperability, what that looks like. But as you said, Nico, loyalty systems are a little bit outdated, and they're not necessarily the easiest thing to tie into nowadays because of that, right? And so it takes a little bit of a reimagining of the loyalties program, which is a little bit more to chew off than building a virtual experience. So, but yeah, I mean, again, an amazing job of really kind of, the team did an awesome job of putting together all of the concepts, all of the vision. I think you can still register at sephorauniverse.com. It's only available in the EU, but it's a great, again, product exploration, product discovery, gamified experience for users. With one of those being kind of an endless runner, and again, learning about the different face masks that Sephora provides. So again, a lot of the little pieces and parts that were tugged into that.
Cool. So the user journey was to go to this world and explore different brands, and then portals to another worlds of these brands, and then kind of all tied together within this Sephora universe, correct?
Yeah, so the big tiered section that you saw first was really all about product, and it was designed with multiple brands products baked into it. So you could click on them, and there were PDPs in there that you could explore the product. You could get more information about it. It would drive you to an e-com site, depending on location. It was set up to only deliver products that you could see in your area, right? So if you're in France, for instance, and somebody else is in Italy and they don't have the same lines, you'll only see Italian makeup, and French will only see French available makeup. So all of that logic was all baked in and everything like that. And so it allowed people to truly explore Sephora and feel confident that they're in a Sephora, but also allow them to connect, directly with brands as well, right? And allow brands to reap some of the rewards from the marketing that they were doing.
Amazing. And so the user will be able to purchase while they're inside the environment, or would they be sent to the Sephora website?
For this one, they were sent out to the Sephora website.
Okay.
Right? And it was obviously dependent again on country, which website they were driven to.
Awesome. And then in terms of the user interaction with each other, am I able to talk to other users, or is it more like I can see them that they're there?
In this one, you could only see them, right? I think there was maybe the ability to chat. I think we might even have removed that. But
because that complicates everything. Right?
The legalities of it and the censorship that's required in online chats. Yeah, it's a difficult one to overcome for sure.
And what about mini games? Did you guys have mini games in those?
The Sephora universe had the endless runner one for a particular product. So for Sephora face masks, there was a mini game baked into that, and again a global leaderboard on that one as well. And there, I do believe there was incentivization prizes kind of attached to that leaderboard, right? So potentially free face mask. I can't remember what the exact was. I think there's some incentivization at the end of it for the leaders of that race.
Yeah, I'm asking this question to kind of compare to existing other metaverse platforms like Decentraland, Spatial. How is it different? So it seems like it doesn't have all the features, but it was sufficient for the use cases and the story they were trying to tell within, as you said earlier, being a Fortnite or Roblox or even Spatial takes a lot more resources. So they had to kind of minimize some aspect of the planning. So we have another question from Philip. Would you be able to speak about the production process behind creating an experience like this from the brand and builder's perspective?
Yeah, so there's I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. There's absolutely traditional game development, and a GDD was 100% used and modified multiple different times. And so, yes, all of those traditional things were baked in. The challenge really lied in the translation process, right? And translating from brand messaging into gamified messaging, right? So how do we tell the story of a particular product, and how do we, at the end of that story, allow people to feel, confident in what they now know about a particular product, right, or a particular brand, in this case of Sephora. And so that was typically the challenge. Was all right, how do you do this? And with Sephora in particular, we wanted to build more of a game system that allowed other brands to plug into this, right? So what we developed for them was a quest system, right? And so the user was given different quests, and there was different collectibles in the world that they could get, and there was some Web3 components baked into that. So some of the rewards were NFTs, right, that users could collect. And so we did that on purpose. We created that system again to allow other brands to plug in and simply just continue on to the quest system, right? And so it created this open exploration. And so using traditional game logic like that, 100% goes into play. And you need to look at what game mechanics work for what brand message, and how that mechanic will help tell that story, right?
That's amazing. Thank you for that. And so, in terms of like the future of some activation like this, do you see them kind of keeping this and repurposing and using it as an evergreen type of solution, or is this something that is just testing and trial and learning and then evolving into something else?
I think anything that you see nowadays is testing and trial and learning, right? Because again, we're not looking at mass adoption for probably another 10 years until we get to a kind of a mass adoption of a 3D internet, right? And so everything we do today is all about learning. It's all about figuring out how to manage, really, I mean, 3D files, right? I mean, just the aspect of trying to manage thousands of products and do that in images, right, was hard enough to overcome in the early 90s with ecom coming out. And hey, I've got 50,000 products, how do I get a picture of every single one of them? What kind of computer do I need to be able to hold all of those files, right? Like, and so we're going to run into those same problems, that are going to need to be solved. Right, the storage of 3D assets, some of these things are huge, right? I mean, and so storing these requires a different system, right? Being able to manage these requires a different system. And so technologies like that are still, figuring out how we do these things will need to get developed before we truly have mass scale. And we're building those, people are building those things, so it can happen. But yeah, it's still a long way out, and so everything we do today should be learning, we should be taking from it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it can't have, real world impacts today or proven ROI today, right? I mean, it just depends on the way we deliver it, who we deliver it to, and how we deliver it.
And there's a lot to learn when you're a pioneer in this space, right? And the markets will respond better because this is a novelty. Unless it's not done so well. So this was a success. That's amazing. Let's talk about the sports use case. And you talked about how stadiums are like studios. And let's look at Atlanta Braves digital twin stadium that you guys used.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll pull that video up. So I mean, yeah, the Brave Stadium was amazing. It truly kind of, for me, set the bar of what was possible for sports, and kind of put education still at the top of my list of what industries are going to benefit the most from this type of technology. I think the education needs to be reimagined right now as it is, and I think 3D has that ability to do that, right? And so I don't think there's another industry out there higher than that has a higher impact than education with this type of technology. So below that, there's a couple others, but sports is at the top of that list. The way we engage with our teams is very traditional, right? Nothing has really changed in the way that I'm able to engage with my sports team. And, since I was 12 years old, right? Now my kids are 12 years old and they're interacting with their team in the exact same manner. And that doesn't necessarily allow for the brands to grow, right? And if we look at teams of brands, it doesn't allow them to grow. And so sports needs to be reimagined. The way we consume sports, the way we interact with our teams, all of that needs to change. And I think the Braves are 100% on track here with what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I'll share
this
video now.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the education is very crucial, as you mentioned, specifically because the way we learn naturally is 3D. The world is 3D. And then we're telling everyone to learn 2D. That just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So let's look at this use case.
Let me hit the audio.
Here's the 2-2 pitch.
The Atlanta Braves, in partnership with Major League Baseball and Surreal Events, are launching a first-of-its-kind experience by building Truist Park in the Battery Atlanta in the metaverse.
That looks pretty real.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome out to Digital Truist Park. It is the metaverse of your world champion, Atlanta Braves.
Wow. Amazing. That was so cool.
So yeah,
it kind of felt even more fun than the real stadium. I want to go there. Awesome.
Yeah, the Braves, like I said, the Braves are on point with it. They're doing all of the right things. You know, they're managing it properly, and they have the right mindset, right? For them, what they have is a digital venue, which is a digital asset, right? They've been digitizing. I mean, we've been digitizing as a society for the last 7 years, right? Everything had to go digital. And so, you know, we talk about digital and it's like, well, what does that even mean nowadays? What's analog, right? Like at this point, you know, that's the other option, and show me something in this world that's analog nowadays, right? Yeah, so there's no more going digital. We are digital, right? And so this is just that next step, right? It's like, all right, if everything else I have is digital, why is my analog stadium not digital, right? Why? And so now that's digital, and that's their mindset. And again, I couldn't agree with that more, right? It's exactly what sports teams should be doing right now to engage. And there is both gamification and monetization kind of baked in to their IP, right? Like their IP is valuable. They need to be leveraging their IP, just like the Braves are leveraging their IP, right? Truist Park is an amazing park. The Battery is an amazing development. Those were investments that were made by the Braves and by, you know, their partners that built the Battery out, right? And so they need to leverage those investments in multiple ways. And this is just one way that they can do it. And they can do it by leveraging the IP that goes along with the Braves, right? So it's that next step that most sports brands now need to take, is that engaging younger fans in different mediums.
So the purpose of this use case was more engagement and bringing more, you know, other types of experiences to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started talking to the Braves, you know, one of their things, I don't remember the exact stats, but let's just say there's 40 million Braves fans, right? And only 20 million of those Braves fans will ever have the opportunity to come to Truist Park. Yes. And so how do we bring Truist Park to them, right? How do we engage with them from a distance in a manner that matters, right? Like, sure, Facebook posts and social media posts, they're great for maybe driving excitement, driving a little bit of engagement in something, you know, but they don't engage with your actual audience, right? And so, you know, that's kind of this is the next evolution of that. This is how we're going to engage, because my kids don't watch TV, right? I've got 3 kids from 6 to 12. They do not watch TV, right? If they watch TV with me and they see a commercial, they're like, what is this? Why is this? What are we watching right now? Right. And that's where we're at. And that's where sports brands still are. They're still in that TV. And so they're asking people to remove themselves from where they're comfortable and go to where they're uncomfortable. And eventually people will stop doing that. Right. And so how do we now move that same content, right, to where the users are? And that in and of itself is 3D content strategy, right? It's hey, you've got content here. You've already got marketing strategy. We already know where it is. We already know what you're trying to do. We just need to move some of that over to here. And it doesn't mean, you know, kill this, right? Like, you know, TV killed the radio star, but it's just moving it, right? And it's moving it because people aren't on the radio anymore. They're on the TV. Well, now they're not on the TV anymore. They're on their computer. They're on their phone, right? And we do a decent job of delivering traditional 2D content to these devices. But again, moving forward, that's not where people are going to be, right? So
Really.
okay.
Yes, every brand needs to adapt to this new realms that we are experiencing, and people are spending their time. Otherwise, they're going to miss out on the eyeballs and the opportunities. So that's great to know. And I have one question. I'm going to go to the audience question. Did they incorporate any types of e-commerce or other ways, like other than the engagement, in terms of the user activities?
So they did. They didn't tie it in like a full loyalties program, but for them, it's more about delivering content, right? So for them, again, they're using the digital twin as a studio to produce content to deliver to their fans. That's kind of their purpose of it, and they do that by bringing some of the fans in. So while I could definitely see an e-commerce store in the future here, it's not necessarily baked in today. There was gamification there. You saw that one kind of endless runner game, and that is actually inside of their museum, right? The Braves Museum. And so, we use the props, we use the pieces from the build itself to create these gamification pieces. Again, help tying in the brand, driving traffic back to the museum to understand what these pieces were. And again, the leaderboard, right? So we could do giveaways and things like that. The other really interesting thing that they've done with it is they've actually pulled in partners. So inside of the Digital Brave Stadium, there is a Hyundai, I don't remember which model it is, but there's a Hyundai vehicle in there that you can configure, you can sit inside of, right? Just like you would at the regular tourist park. And so they're able to do these types of things. And again, they're doing that with their IP. They're leveraging their IP to Hyundai in order to deliver Hyundai content to their fan base, right? It's again, to me, it's ingenious, right? It's exactly what most brands need to be doing now.
And it's kind of like the sponsorships and partnerships of the real world. So they don't need to like really think of it as something strange. They're already doing that in real world with the activations, with partnerships. So just bring it into this new virtual world. Totally.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Yes, exactly. The other questions that we have from the audience are related to Web3 and the future. So before we get into those discussions, as a whole, when brands are thinking about all of these type of activations and engagement, what type of ROIs, we touched on a lot of them. What type of ROIs do you recommend them looking at, and what they shouldn't be worried too much about?
So when we look at these types of experiences, we need to look at them in the same light as marketing campaigns, right? I mean, what we're doing is marketing. It's nothing more. It's marketing. It's a different channel for marketing, but at the end of the day, it's marketing. And so the KPIs, the ROI that we measure against, it should all be based on what we're already basing our marketing material off of, right? How did that social media campaign go, right? How did that YouTube video ad go? How did the TikTok thing go, right? Those same measurements, those same tools that we're using to engage, to measure our own strategies internally, they need to be used here, right? And if we're not using those, then we're using it wrong.
That's totally fine. Yeah, that's exactly how they should be thinking about it, and it's not anything new in that sense. Awesome. So Chris is mentioning self-custody, decentralized digital ID, and data sovereignty is imperative. All that's relevant right now. Awesome. Was there any Web3 element into this Atlanta Braves digital twin stadium or not?
No, there was not. Part of it too is sports is tough. They're very bureaucratic in that regard, where you've got the league that sits over top of the teams, and each league has different controls over their own teams, and so it's we have to break through a lot of that. Like, again, we kind of got into that a little bit, like who owns 3D broadcasting rights, right? Is that a thing? Yeah. Do those get broken out, or are broadcasting rights inclusive of 3D content, right? And that's what we have to look at today. So that's what we're kind of dealing with in sports, and that's why sports will be slow, but will be high impact by the end of it, right?
So, what other challenges did you experience as you were creating this type of experiences, if any, you want to share?
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of
So
challenges
many.
in anything like this, right? I mean, I think it can be difficult to I've always been able to see a big picture, right? I've always been able to like kind of be able to step back and view that, and I've learned as I got older that not everybody has that ability to be able to do that, and so there are times when we are talking to somebody that doesn't have that ability, and they get it, but it's just not doesn't click all the way, right? Like they're like, all right, what you're saying makes sense, but I can't visualize it in my head.
Mhm.
And a lot of what we're trying to deliver is we have to visualize how this is going to work, what this is going to look like, and try to articulate that, right? And we can do storyboards and we can do designs and we can do everything like that. But what we found was that until somebody got into it, most of the time they didn't get it, right?
Yes, that's so true.
That's always the challenge. And so one of the things that we were very focused on from the beginning is how do we get people inside of these experiences, like our team, right? Like people we're working with, our clients, how do we get them inside of their own experience as fast as possible so that the sooner it can click, it clicks, right? Because once you're in it, then you're like, now I get it, right? But 2D doesn't do 3D justice, hence the reason why we need 3D in the first place, right? So trying to
Yeah.
deliver 2D and trying to sell 3D with 2D is very, very difficult, right? So
Yes, that's so true, and that's a good segue to what Philip asked. With Apple Vision Pro, like anyone who doesn't understand or believe in VR, just have them try Vision Pro and they get it. So that's a really good point that you made. So talking about the future and kind of where we are heading with all of these use cases, how do you envision the future to be with Vision Pro or with other tools that we have?
yeah, it all goes back to making it easier, right? I mean, that's what a lot of what we're trying to accomplish does. And AR is really fun, but nobody really wants to hold their phone up like this and look at AR, right?
Maybe the glasses would help.
Yeah, I think the glasses will help. I've got a pair of the X Reels that are behind me on my shelf there. I get into them every once in a while. I think they're very close. I mean, if nobody's familiar with them, definitely check out the X Reels. They're at least close, somewhat fashion wise. I think the Apple Vision Pro is close technology wise, right? And so we need to figure out how we bring these two pieces of technology together. The problem that X Reel is going to face is they don't have the app ecosystem that Apple does. Right. And so what we need is that ecosystem, right? Because I mean, you saw the minute they launched, the AVP, there was already apps out and available for it, and people were testing with it and developing apps, right? Like Xreal's been out for years. They don't have that type of developer community, and so it's going to take somebody like that. But the problem there with that technology then is now that it's owned. It's a delivery mechanism in and of itself, right? And so because of that, it becomes the extension of our phone, or it becomes our phone, right? I think we still walk around with computers in our pockets, but I think the vast majority is going to be chips and battery as opposed to screen, right? And because the screen will be our glasses, and so we'll be able to see whatever we need to see. So as we do that, and how that works, and again, I love VR. VR's got a place too, right? I mean, and so VR headsets have a place. And again, I think Apple Vision Pro is close because it is more augmented reality in the sense that I am fully immersed in my current space. It's closer to VR from a hardware perspective, right? So from a technology perspective, it understands what it's trying to do. From a hardware perspective, they're still trying to figure it out, and that's power, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. It boils down to having, you need power, you need a lot of energy, and so we just need to figure out that connection point between glasses and a phone. I know Ericsson's working on some stuff with that right now, and so we'll get to that point. But then that becomes then, Phil, to your point, or Philip, to your point, 100%. Yes, then we switch, right? I mean, there are times where I will work inside my headset, just sitting on my couch, right? It's comfortable. It's not terrible, right? And so why not? So yes, we will see that switch from, mobile to really kind of heads up, and again, how much AI plays a role in this when we start thinking about AI and what's possible there.
And how do you advise brands to think about this type of tech hardware solutions? Should they worry about VR? We saw some activations on Apple Vision Pro, but not so much of that. What do you think about that when brands are thinking about where should they create their experiences?
Well, that's, and there's a couple of different groups that are working on kind of what the infrastructure looks like to run an open metaverse, right? And so, and again, if we look at the metaverses, it's just the internet, and we can, if we can look at the internet and call it Web 3 and call it Web 3 because it's after Web 2 and it's not NFTs and it's not crypto, right? It's a technology. So if we can call it Web 3 in the sense of the technology that's going to drive the internet, then we can look at 3D as a part of that, right? And so we need to figure out, what brands should be worried about today is how are they going to be able to re-leverage their assets, right? So the Braves, for instance, how do I use that as a virtual event, and how do I use that to allow, the boomer to find the bathroom, right? Or the beer stand. Like, I need to be able to use it in two different technology forms. I need to be able to deliver it across platforms. And so that's what we should be working on today is that from a brand's perspective. Yes, let's build the content, but let's be cautious of what we're building and how we can leverage it across multiple different platforms, and what that looks like. Because you can build something that can work inside a UEFN, that can also work inside of, an application on your phone, that can also work inside of AR, right? So don't spend all the money to build towards a singular platform and a singular use case. Make sure that the money that you're spending is spent wisely building, 3D that can be used across different platforms.
That reminds me of the omni-channel strategy that was so common when e-commerce and social media were getting popular, but now it's like another wave of omni-channel with different new channels. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. That was amazing. I personally learned a lot, and I appreciate you kind of making all these very understandable analogies that make us kind of tell the story of like why these technologies are important and how they can be applied to what brands are already doing. And I call this episode as the third dimension of marketing, because this is literally another version of marketing, another type of channels. Awesome. Nick, where can people find you? How can they support you? What are you working on next that we can be all following you along?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. Obviously, you can hit me up there. Also, dimensionaldexterity.com is my personal website. It's just my thoughts and ideas as I have them about the metaverse. I've got a newsletter on LinkedIn that you can subscribe to as well. And again, it's just my thoughts and where things are headed. But yeah, building some really cool stuff with some really cool people right now at 80LV. So 80.lv is the website. 80 Level is the company. So very exciting, what we're working on over there. And I think it's set to revolutionize how brands will be able to find the audience that they're looking for in a much more meaningful way.
Amazing. And I know that you're empowering creators as well, the gamers, the game developers.
So we didn't even get into, right, is the whole concept of UGC, right? I mean, this space is very hard to produce content in, and so having a UGC setup is ideal for brands and their 3D content, right?
And that's, again, very similar to what they did in social media. They couldn't create all the content, so they tapped into the influencers. Exactly. Again, same concepts can be applied to a 3D world. Thank you so much, Nick. This was amazing. Thank you to our amazing audience, Philip and Chris, for the great questions, and everyone who followed us. We appreciate you, and please follow Nick, and we will be putting the recording on YouTube so you can come back and relearn and follow us along. We'll be back next Tuesday, 9 a.m. PST. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you,
Take
Nico.
care.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.